Action.
Hello, well, welcome to our third session here, virtual tour, part 3, here at New Vocations Racehorse Adoption Program. We're currently here in Lexington at the New Vocations at Mereworth Farm property. And we thank you for everyone joining us today. We're part of the Horse Country Tours, and we've been providing these virtual tours every Wednesday at 1 o'clock to give you guys an inside look at what we do here at our program. Just a quick overview of New Vocations in case you missed part 1 and part 2. New Vocations is the largest and oldest racehorse adoption program in the country, and we service over 500 horses on an annual basis. And so this facility here in Lexington is our main facility, and today we're going to be featuring or talking about the retraining side of what we do. Our mission is very easily described by that we focus on rehabbing, retraining, and rehoming retired racehorses. I have to let you know we had to do some last minute changes here, and so doing these live videos, there's a lot going on around the scenes that a lot of you can't see. We're going to show you as much as we can, but we had a lot going on that we had to kind of change up what we're talking about today just a little bit. So sorry if I'm a little bit not all together. But anyhow, back to our mission of rehab, retrain, rehome. Today we're going to focus on the retraining side of things. Part 1, we talked about our history. Part 2, we talked about our rehab program and our partnership here with Mereworth, and today is the retraining side. So I was going to have Curlin here come talk to us. This guy here, his name is Curlin Creek, and he's a horse that came into our program last year, almost a year ago. He's been here 11 months. Let's see if he'll come over here, Leandra.
Hi, Asbad.
That's his neighbor next door, Asbad. And just to talk a little bit about, before we get into the retraining side, Curlin Creek here, he came to us, like I said, almost a year ago. And before we could actually put him up for adoption, he required some rehab time, which we did not think would be as long as it has been. He had a minor, some fragments or fracture in his sesamoid, which is a bone way down here. And it's a very small bone, and it's very limited on blood flow and circulation, and those injuries tend to take longer to heal. They also, with the sesamoid bone, the soft tissue or ligaments run right across it, and so he not only had some little fragments down there that couldn't be removed, but he also had some damage to that soft tissue area. So he just required extra time. We brought him over from the rehab side 2 or 3 times, and every time he just wasn't quite ready. He's back in the training side now, so we're very excited to get him back into the program. And he's going to be going up for adoption pretty soon. So this is Curlin's Creek. He's not really wanting to talk because he's enjoying his hay here. Hey, bud. So we just wanted to use him as an example of kind of tying in last week's rehab side. He's been on the rehab program. Now he's moved over to our training barn, which is where we're at right now. Hey, bud. You want to read the script? Okay, so let's go ahead and move into...
I have to sidestep for a second because Asbad is entertaining himself and it's very distracting. Jollyball's making good scratching posts as well as a hat, and Asbad is demonstrating our seasonal featured hat, the Jollyball. Very nice. You wear it so well. And it's seconds as a scratching post. Very creative. Nicely done. There. All right. That was our detour.
So if you're new to the tours, we are in one of our training barns, like I said earlier, and this is the Whirlwind Poppy barn. And so every horse that's in this barn is currently in transitional training and getting ready for adoption. And we have several that have already been adopted and are waiting. And actually, that was one of the things that we had come up right when we started to film is that Zapparini, who is in the other barn, his adopter came to pick him up. So originally, Leandra and I were going to be interviewing through this, but instead, Leandra's going to be our camera person today.
You'll get some creative angles.
But when we look at our priorities, when we have a horse that's going to get its home, we're going to let our crew go over and load that horse up. So yeah, let's head on over.
And we will be talking about the rehoming part next week. Isn't that right?
That's right. So I know it's going to be a little windy out here, so I'll try to stay close. I'm going to pan out. You can see a little bit of the farm. We're very excited to have the guys out actually mowing our fields for the first time. It's always a great sign. It means summer is coming. We have our outdoor arena here, which is really windy. I'm sure you can hear that. So we're going to move into the indoor arena and start talking about the training process that happens here once the horses come over to the training side. Just a reminder, as we're talking and videoing, feel free to drop your questions in the section. We'll do our best to answer those as Why don't you pan over there? This is Zapparini. So we just had a horse Zapparini picked up, and now he's going to his new home. Which state is he going to? Is he local?
I actually am totally blanking on this. Jordan Bird, I'm sorry. She's the adopter. I have to go to my cheat sheet because we've had so many adoptions. He's going to North Carolina.
North Carolina.
It's been a popular state of choice for these horses. I'm jealous. Apparently, it's much warmer there.
Whew. Okay, so we're going to do a switcheroo here on our camera.
How's Rambo today? He's doing just fine. Just let everybody know he's here. He's very chatty today.
Okay, so the voice behind the camera earlier, Leandra Cooper, our facility director and trainer here at Mereworth Farm.
Entertainer, karaoke singer, lots of things.
So I'm going to ask you the questions that I had for us earlier.
Yeah. You mean multitasking?
Yeah. So right now we're here in the indoor arena, and we've got a horse working here in the background. So when a horse arrives to New Vocations and they enter the program, they either go to the rehab barn or the training barn. Mm-hmm. We saw Curlin. He went to the rehab barn first and then came over here.
Yep.
So tell us about when a horse either comes here first, straight from the racetrack, or comes, like Curlin moves over from the rehab barn here. What's the first things you do with the horse when they arrive?
Yeah. So the first thing is always to make a judgment and assessment on their physical and mental readiness for training. Some horses prefer to stay and work. They have sort of busy minds. Obviously, a lot of people choose to do the whole retraining process differently, but here we do it on a very individualized basis. So whether or not they've been in rehab or have come straight from the track, we're going to be making the assessment, deciding whether or not they're ready to start the training process. And like I said, we do that based off of mental and physical preparedness. So if they have ailments and need rehab, obviously they've got to do that. Mm-hmm. But so say we've cleared that obstacle, then we're looking mostly at the mental side of things. So one of the first things we're looking at is their social awareness, shall we say. So a lot of times when horses have come right from the track, or maybe if they've just been on stall rest and then on limited turnout, they still might not, in either one of those scenarios, be really familiar with turnout as we know it in a post-track sort of scenario of just being out with other horses in a big field. So numero uno is going to be getting them used to being in turnout. And so for us, a lot of times we're starting with them in our round pens, whether or not they're coming from a rehab situation or from the track, because we really just want to see what they do and how they act when they're in a turnout that's smaller, so they can't really get going in a way where they can injure themselves, but they can see all the other horses. We always have another horse in a round pen with them. So we're really just starting that evaluation of social awareness.
So just let me jump in there.
Yeah.
For some of our viewers, so at the track, if they're coming right from the track, they don't get turned out at the racetrack, right?
That's
What's their life there like at the track,
So,
as far as their, exercise and stuff like that?
Yeah, so they're usually in their stalls exclusively, except for when they're going out to train and race. So when they're going out, they're very much in game ready mode, and it's a hyper focused, like hyper athletic endeavor. So to have a just sort of casual leisure time is usually a very unfamiliar aspect to them, except for in maybe situations where they've had downtime at a farm or in select cases. But as a generalization, they're in their stall except for when they're getting workouts, maybe just hand walking around the barn or racing. So it's a much different mindset than just the go out, casual, have a good time with your buddy sort of situation.
Which is why we don't just turn them out in a big open field and let them romp around.
You can imagine you have a horse who's used to going out exclusively when they're racing or training, and you turn them out in a big field. That things like we make sure our fence lines are very visible even when they are going out there, so they know the boundaries. But say you have this hyper athlete and you turn them out in a field, then they're going to want to probably run or just not really know how to act, and aren't used to interacting with other horses like that except for as competitors. So it's just a total mental shift for them, so we ease them into it. And so the round pens are really the first step in doing that. We are really lucky here to be able to have all different sizes of turnouts and lots of different horses in different stages, including our one permanent resident ranger, who can help to transition these horses to our bigger fields, which is where we like to get them before we're putting them into our training schedule, because we want them to have that time to adjust just in that first step of the mental preparedness. And in that time, we can start to look at how they move physically, like what are their gaits like, what is their attitude like, and we can get to know a lot about them just in that time. So we really like to give them as much time as they need as individuals to just get through that first step there. Once we tackle that, did you have another?
Yeah, no, so that's good. So once you tackle that, and then I just wanted you to maybe use this horse behind us to talk about the next step.
Perfect example. So Brood here, he was at one of our remote rehab facilities in Lexington. So we are trying to help as many horses as possible, and we have space for around 20 horses right across the street. And beyond that, we're able to help even more than that by working with a barn here around Lexington. And we work very closely with the person who runs that facility, and she helps to do just some of our layups. So he was there, and he started his turnout there. So we were able to skip a couple steps, and we knew that he was already familiar with how to go out and everything, and we were just then working him into a bigger group. But this is Brood. He's a 4-year-old gelding. He has a very goofy personality. He's very kind to work with. He's really easy to work with, quick learner type. He just is kind of a malleable type of personality. So he picked up on everything quickly, is what I'm trying to say. Like, he doesn't really put an argument up about anything. He doesn't have a lot of strong opinions of his own. He just is kind of eager to please and wants to figure things out. So he has a really good mental status, shall we say. And then physically, he had already undergone his rehab, and that was for both front superficial digital flexor tendons, which are the soft tissue areas in between the knee and what you could call their ankle. So kind of like what Anna was talking about with Curling Creek, but it's just it's a tendon rather than the ligament that he had rehabbed. And that was both front soft tissue tendons that he had rehabbed for, and you can see he still moves along just fine and doesn't have really visibly bulky legs or anything. So one of the things we're looking at obviously is considering the history, and some things like small circles would be really difficult for a horse who was still working on healing up those tissues. So Brood's come along really well. We haven't started him under saddle yet, but because he's doing so well in the groundwork aspects, which is where we like to start horses before we get under saddle, because again, that allows us to evaluate them and see what stage of that process, clearly he had the turnout part of it well tackled. So we're starting him in work, seeing how well he can focus, what his attitude's like with new situations, like going over the ground pole there, having smaller circles, bigger circles, being in indoor, outdoor, all those sort of things. We get to know the horse on the ground, and then we start them under saddle.
So with the groundwork, if like he was coming off of an injury that was rehabbed, when you work them on the tight circles like that, if it is bothering them, that's a good way to see if it's still bothering him, which obviously watching him it's not. So that's right. Another good reason to do a little bit of this groundwork before you start to ride them again, right?
Absolutely. So again, you're going back to that physical and mental readiness to start training, and so far he's checked all the boxes. So we'll be starting him under saddle this week, and if things go the same as how they already have gone with him, he should be one that goes up online as adoptable pretty soon.
Okay. Allie, bring him over here. We'll just meet him real fast. I had a couple notes on Brood.
He was very curious about the pole.
What is that pole? So Mr. Brood here, and this is Allie. He is by pretty popular sire right now named Into Mischief, who stands for quite a bit. Brood sold as a 2-year-old for $260,000, and he only ended up racing one time at Gulfstream Park before he ended up injuring himself, and then they gave him the long rehab and decided it was better just to let him go on to a second career versus put him back at the racetrack, which is great because now he's going to be pretty unlimited on what he can do. So
Absolutely.
Brood. Well, thank you for showing us the groundwork portion, Brood. You did really, really well. Looks like you're going to get a ride soon, huh?
He's watching our other subject here. He's already trying to study the under saddle portion.
Let's have this one come on this side then.
Julie, you want to migrate over to this house so we can see you a little better?
You can go. Julie, you can walk for a second. And bring her over here.
So this is Caramel Moon. She's a 6-year-old. I've thrown Julie on her for the first time for this video, which has become my new favorite thing to do. Just tell Julie to get on a ridden horse, but she's never ridden. We all enjoy it.
And Caramel Moon just raced like in February 20th, I believe, right?
February 20th.
You can keep her walking around. She wants to move.
She's in work mode still, and
that's
so
fine.
Just as far as how they
just walk
come
like a
here.
small circle around this area so we can talk about her.
So she's a horse who's come recently off the track, and she is a workaholic. So this is a horse who, even when she's in turnout, she likes to be head of the crowd, and now she wants to go out because Brood's just been out here. She's like, wait a second. So she's really new into the under saddle portion, but she's insanely smart. On the groundwork side of things, like she was pretty funny actually. I started doing it, and she's a little bit of a stereotypical chestnut mare in that she just had opinions about things, and if you were going to try to push her through it and weren't patient with kind of partnering up with her first, that she would just plant her feet and didn't want to be part of it, or would rear up or something. But the amount of time it took for her to figure that out was ridiculously fast before, just with a little bit of patience and sort of finessing and just gaining her trust, all of a sudden she could do everything and had no fears, no inhibitions, would go over little poles and everything, just accelerated. So starting her under saddle, and you can see she has a little bit of a high headset, and she's got this kind of power walk to her, and Julie was just trotting her around earlier. She's really lovely in work, and now we're just working on the part of her just relaxing, just realizing, again, that every ride is not going to be stressful. It's not exercise or racing, like the two things we were talking about, either stay in their stalls except for getting jogged, hand walked, or racing. So she still has that really hyper work mode. So we're just transitioning the mental part of it, because she clearly has the physical readiness. She's really, really smart and can learn. And so sometimes with that type of horse, you do best when you let them focus in work. And then in work, you just want to make sure that they're understanding the de-escalation of their workload. So it's kind of a less stressful type of style, I guess.
So now when you start with them under saddle, you talked about some of the basics with her, but what are some of the basics that you're going to want her to be able to do?
In order for them to be up on line, we generally have done walk, trot, and canter, as well as introduce them to ideally both indoor and outdoor, and sometimes there's a little bit of seasonality to that. If we have really nasty winter, we might not have taken them outside. But especially this time of year when we can do both indoors and outdoors, we're trying to figure out if there's little things that make them tick, what they like and don't like, and evaluating through the different gaits. We like to use a lot of ground poles too. Helps you to be able to figure out how they think, how they handle different challenges, and just you can figure out between all those things when they're going to be ready to have a different person. And with us too, obviously we have different riders. I can see if the horse is going to react the same with me under saddle as with Allie or Julie. And it gives me a sense of just learning them. Again, I just want to make sure we understand them as an individual, because that's what's going to help me the most in placing them with an adopter, because I think I've mentioned it before, but I want to be able to place horses with people who will handle them even on their bad days, and not just assume that they're always going to behave like they will on their best day, because they're individuals and they have feelings and good days and bad days just like we do. So I sometimes call it like stress testing them, and obviously that sounds like they're stressed out all the time, but really we're exploring their boundaries and figuring out what their thresholds are, and ideally working on weaknesses and building on strengths, and just making them a balanced individual all over, and then figuring out if they do have little quirks or something, who's going to be able to handle that, who's going to be able to bring them to their highest potential.
What would be some things that you would call, that the general public would say, what are some myths about a retired racehorse that you think the general public should know are not true?
There are a lot of different stereotypes, probably. She just wants to be near us so bad. You could go a lot of different ways with that. Definitely their attitudes. A lot of people see off-track thoroughbreds as just hot creatures, and we just in the number of horses we see, I can tell you that we see the entire spectrum. There are horses who are just downright lazy, even if they've come right from their last race. There are horses who are sort of high-octane athletes, like Caramel Moon here, who, she's keeping her feet on the ground. She's really not doing anything bad. We wouldn't place her with a novice rider or somebody who wasn't prepared for, keeping her in between their hands and their legs, that sort of thing. But you'll see the whole spectrum. There is no cookie cutter vision for an off the track thoroughbred. So you really have to consider how each individual can be, and encourage people to be a little open-minded, because we've seen everything.
So yeah, I think a myth out there is that all they want to do is, all they know is that they can
Just
run.
run.
They just want to run. Julie, want to go ahead and see if she'll trot a little bit? So obviously she's not just wanting to run away. She's quite happy walking.
Yep, they've got all their gaits, and they'll jog on the track and exercise and work their way up and everything. So definitely, I think people just see them gallop and think that that's just what they do, but they're well educated in all of the different gaits. Definitely capable of all of it.
Well, here when we get to the end, I think we can show one of the things that's hard for most horses that we get in that we're riding, and that is to stand still.
Yeah.
So she's not wanting to run off, but as far as, hey, stand still, that's not something that they have to do very often when they're at the racetrack.
Yeah. And certainly even with other breeds of horses, I mean, we see these young horses are like kind of like kid celebrities. You just see them at such a young age. But if you're at other barns where you work with young horses, I mean, they have sort of personalities like that too. Think about like a toddler. A lot of them just can't sit still. So we just see so much. There's so much exposure of these horses when they're 2, 3, 4 years old that it's really not uncommon. But it's something that they mature out of, and it's definitely not something that they're taught is be able to just stand there indefinitely. So that's a little bit of a skill set to learn patience, just like any kid.
And so I know next week we're going to talk about the adoption process, but for the foundation of the training that they're receiving here, the foundation is pretty much the same for many disciplines, right? So,
absolutely.
What are some of the main disciplines that these horses will end up going on to, and how does the training that they're receiving here get them started with that?
Yeah. So there are a lot of different, we definitely have adopted horses out for every type of discipline, but we see a lot of eventing, hunter jumper, a lot of people just wanting pleasure rides, which is fantastic. We'll get Western disciplines as well. They're not as common for what people are looking for generally, but certainly hunter jumper, cross country, dressage are all pretty common. So when we're working with a horse and trying to figure out what they might be successful in, I try not to put too much judgment on them, but we will, even in their descriptions, sort of say, we could definitely see this horse excelling in X, Y, and Z. And some of the things that give us some insight to that are conformation and the way that they move and their mindset. And mindset obviously can change, as can their builds. When they're young, they can change a lot as they mature and get older. But we're looking, we know the horse kind of in the now, so we're looking at, if we started to work with them towards one discipline or another, where could we see them going? So as an example of that, if you have a horse who just kind of enjoys having a lower headset, maybe has a little bit straighter legs in their gait and bigger, rounder, like maybe that's going to be a show hunter. A horse like her who's kind of sporty and that sleek build, really like hyper athlete mind. Again, I kind of classify her as like high octane athlete type that they often really enjoy doing things where they can be in more demanding structured jobs, maybe jumping or eventing. And horses who, you can just go on and on, I guess. Like some I've recommended for polo because they're smaller, they're sporty, and maybe a little handy, and don't care if you could be like waving your hand up and down, and you can mimic a lot of the same movements. So sometimes we'll do things like that where we say, what do you do when I ask you for a little bit more contact? What do you do when I wave my hand around above my head? How do you feel about that? What's your threshold? So all of that information will play into our recommendations for them and what we're looking for in an adopter when they're asking about a horse. So there are so many different variables subconsciously and consciously that you're considering that feed into our decisions. And she can come back in here.
Yeah, let's have her come on over here and you can go ahead and jump off. I think she'll maybe stand better without. Good girl.
I had a trainer, a great role model to me, who always liked horses as show jumpers when they had big ears. It was one of the things I noticed with her. She has some pretty big ears for her size. She's so itchy. I'm so itchy, I know. But he would say that he thought that big ears gave them like a better perception of their surroundings, so they weren't as spooky, and they just made great show jumpers. And I don't have enough statistical evidence to say whether or not that's true, but I always think about that. So
That's awesome.
there you go.
Great. Well, good job, girl. So now she's how many rides has she had?
This is her third ride.
Third ride here.
Yeah.
Very good.
I'm very active in my mouth. What's a chew?
Well, one of the things thoroughbreds definitely know is a work ethic, and they do tend to like to have a job, whether it's a trail riding job or a highly competitive show jumping job, which is why we do what we do. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure these horses get to have an active retirement, not just retired to a field somewhere, because they all have something that they can give to somebody, and that's what our mission is. So, okay. Well, before we sign off, can you share with us on how? Well, first, if there's any questions before we go, please put those in the comment section, and we'll get to those. But share with us how anyone who's watching can help.
If you go onto our website, newvocations.org, you can see we have lots of different opportunities. If you are just wanting to give, if you want to sponsor a particular aspect of our organization, then you can choose to donate in a number of different ways if that's how you're wanting to help. And if you're in the market for a horse, we would suggest that you consider adopting. And we certainly have a lot of horses who are looking for fantastic homes. And you can find out information about how you can become an approved adopter at our website, newvocations.org. And feel free to continue to tune in here. We every day have meet and greets for horses at noon, so you can see all our adoptable horses. And next week, we'll be talking about the fourth portion of our columns for which define our organization and our mission, and that would be rehoming.